Paul, would you like to talk us through your role of how you became a compliance consultant and to where you are today?
I will. It's a long story, so if I go on too long, jump in and stop me by all means. But way back, and I'm going back now to probably the mid-1980s, such a thing as compliance officers, money laundering reporting officers, and even the concept of compliance was, let's say, relatively new and not particularly innovative at the time. We were in a situation where new legislation prompted new rules, new regulators, and I won't go through all the, let's say, acronyms that might not make a lot of sense in this day and age, but there were a lot. And what happened was, I think it would be fair to say that people who maybe were more mature or had a modicum of legal understanding or training, or in some cases had been maybe a finance person or an accountant or auditor as part of their role, found themselves, let's say, volunteered for the roles that had to be filled at that time for compliance officer, money laundering reporting officer, and so on. Later, a few years later, including the role of training and competence officer also came along. And it was very much a question of, let's say, I won't say that people were overly reluctant to take the roles, but they certainly weren't preferred roles or perceived career paths at that time. Roll on a number of years, and what became apparent was that somebody needed to specialise in this area. And that's really where, around about the late 1980s, early 1990s, the consulting side of compliance and regulation began to emerge. I was lucky enough, or unlucky enough, whichever way you want to phrase it, to be one of that early cohort. So we began to get, in the firm I was involved in at the time, began to get involved in consulting activities at two levels. One, in the preparatory stages of the Financial Services Act as it was back then, and then latterly on the implementation side of it. And the rest then is really history, because what began to emerge was that this wasn't a one-off task or a one-off challenge. It was a continuing, recurring requirement, would be the best way. And once that penny dropped, what began to emerge from there is the pathway of either being a compliance officer or a money laundering reporting officer or similar within a regulated entity, or the reverse almost, which is working for multiple clients, advising people who were compliance officers or money laundering reporting officers. So from my point of view, I started out, as well as being a very early stage consultant, I was actually also compliance officer for the firm I worked for at the time, and then subsequently broke away and set my own firm up, my own consulting firm, and the rest, as they say, is history. That's way back in the 1990s. What has happened since then is that both for compliance officers and money laundering reporting officers and other regulated roles within firms, within regulated firms, there has emerged a career path now in compliance where somebody may at a relatively early stage find they have an interest in compliance and regulation and want to go down that route as a career pathway. And that's mirrored on the consulting side, where we're now finding that people are being attracted to consulting, but instead of going into more generic consulting, they're now finding that there's a pathway, particularly for people who may be law graduates or have other interests in the more specialised areas of financial services, in getting involved in compliance and regulatory consulting. So I'm very much a case of somebody who drifted into this almost by accident, realised I actually quite enjoyed it. And although many people can think of compliance and compliance consulting as maybe being dry and maybe a bit legalistic, the truth of it, in my experience, is actually it's very much a people-focused part of the industry. It's people who misbehave, it's people who behave well. And the rules and regulations are simply the standards by which we judge their behaviour.
Excellent. What advice would you give to a young person looking to go into the role of compliance as a career?
There are several pieces of advice, and this is very fresh because I'm involved actually at the moment in supervising a training program within our firm for new compliance consultants. The first one is to recognise that consultancy, certainly, is quite challenging. So if you want an easier life, don't be a consultant. On the other hand, if you want a very rewarding and very varied challenge or series of challenges, it certainly delivers on that score. The rest of it, like many things, is recognising that there will be a huge amount of hard work and potentially repetitive tasks that have to be done and have to be done well. And that is made much more interesting and much more fulfilling by some of the unusual things that arise out of those more repetitive or more recurring tasks and functions. And it's that provides, in my experience anyway, a very high degree of job satisfaction. And like any job, if it was all enjoyment, we'd probably be calling it a hobby rather than a job. So you have to expect that there's an element of let's say, things that we may not enjoy quite so much as others. But absolutely, but that's counterbalanced by the moments of high excitement, high drama in some cases, and that sense of having really done a job that's been done well and is acknowledged as being done well, and that makes a big difference. The lucky occasions you actually get to see that manifested in hard results. Maybe in results that are, shall we say, in the public domain. Very often they're not, but sometimes they are. And that's the point where you can think, well, yeah, we did a good job today. Yeah. We've earned our fees or our wages today.